dear children. Welcome back to the class. Please take page number 67. Today we shall discuss the poem Death the Leveler. Already I have given an introduction on the poem Death the Leveler. Now let's move on to the explanation of the poem. Death the Leveler is a powerful poem by James Shirley, which reminds us about death, that death is a force that haunts all human beings. Therefore, the poem can also be treated as a funeral song. There is a saying in Bible, "Man, thou art dust, you will return to dust." Man, you are dust, therefore you will return to dust. That is the actual theme of the poem. Bible says that man has evolved out of earth or out of dust, and ultimately man must return to dust as well. Or man is destined to die. The poem is all about that. Death is an absolute certainty for all men. The poem says that death is an absolute certainty for all men. The poet stresses again and again that man is mortal, that we will die. He stresses the inevitability of death, or we cannot avoid death. The poet shows how all men are made equal in death. The poet shows us how kings and farmers are made equal in death. Neither king nor farmer can escape the inevitability of death. But the only thing that survives death is the noble deeds. Even though man is mortal, man's noble deeds are the only way in which he will remain immortal. His good deeds will never die, and he will be remembered forever if he is doing good, right deeds in his life. Therefore, the poem gives us a realistic picture of life and death. Actually, the poem was written in the age when Napoleon Bonaparte was at his height of power. So when our poet James Shirley wrote the poem, he had certain people in his mind. Here the poet is giving a warning to the great Napoleon. And poet believed that death would eventually be his fate also. So the purpose of the poem was a warning to the king, showing that he had no escape from death. He killed many people, but he too will die. He cannot escape from death even with his courage and with his huge army. So the poem denotes that no matter how important your blood is or how powerful you are in life, death will make you as meaningless as a shadow, and you will be forgotten and neglected forever. And only if you are doing good and wise deeds in your life, you will be remembered even after our shifts between death. A number of settings. In the first stanza, we get a glimpse of a kingly court as well as the fields of peasants. In the second stanza, we are confronted with a battlefield. In the third stanza, we see an altar of human sacrifice as well as a graveyard. Now we shall consider the first stanza. The glories of our blood and state are shadows, not substantial things. These are the first two lines of the poem. See, actually in the first stanza, the poet conceives death as a great leveler that levels and equalizes all disparities. Death has no distinction between the rich and the poor, high and low, king and farmer, strong and weak. There is no distinction. All are equal before death. So the glories of a blood and state are considered to be shadows, not substantial thing. Substantial meaning concrete or permanent. The poet says that the glories of a blood and state are only shadows. Here, glories meaning the fame and reputation. Blood signifies your family tradition, your family reputation, and state signifies your social status, which means that your family tradition or social status cannot help you at the time of death. Okay, so your position, your achievements, your family status are of no use when you die. They are just like shadows. No matter how great our achievements are, how great your family is, at death nothing matters. So they are like shadows. Taking pride in your birth, taking pride in your status, social status, all these things are insignificant. And these are like shadows which remain till the person is alive. All these things may help you only when you are alive. At the time of our death, they are of no use to us. These things cannot prevent us from death. So here the poet compares the fleeting accomplishments or the meaninglessness of our accomplishments, the fleeting accomplishments of human beings with the unavoidable reality of death. Your wealth, your religion, your caste, your class, etc. mean nothing to death. They are of no use at your time of death and after your death. Okay, so that's the meaning of the first two lines, and here you could see a figure of speech. The fame and reputation, the glories of a blood and state, isn't it, are compared to shadows. The glories of our blood and state are shadows. So here the poet is using a comparison. The glories of our blood and state are compared to shadows, which is an example of a metaphor. Okay, here we have an instance of a metaphor in the first two lines. Now the third line, there is no armor against fate. The meaning of the word armor is weapon. And fate means death, vidhi. So the ultimate fate is death, isn't it? We are born to die, that's the meaning. So the final fate of a human being is we are mortals, and the final fate is death. There is no armor against death. Man has no armor, man has no weapon to hold against fate. We cannot prevent death. Fate meaning death. Here fate is death. So we cannot prevent death. Death is something that we cannot stop or escape, regardless of who you are in life, who we are in life. We cannot stop death. There is no weapon to fight against death. Death is not something that is to be fought with. We cannot prevent death. So that's the meaning of the third line. Now, fourth line. Death lays his icy hand on kings. Death, lay meaning to put. He lays his icy hand on kings. So here death is personified. Death is presented as a living entity, and the figure of speech is death is presented as having hand. So which means it's presented as a human being. So the figure of speech is personification. So death is personified as a living entity, living person with cold, icy hands, who makes everyone equal when he touches them. So when he touches human beings, what happens to them? They will die. Even the king, who was all powerful, will tremble before death. So when death lays his icy hands on king, what happened to the kings? He will tumble down. See, the scepter and crown must fall down. He will fall down. Scepter and crown symbolizes the king, the power of the king, the position of the king. Okay, so scepter meaning the royal baton of the king. The word meaning of scepter is that it's a royal baton, chengol, and crown, kiridam. So what happens when he sees death? So when death comes before king, the king will tremble, he will shiver, and everything will fall down. So death befalls on everyone equally, regardless of being a king or a peasant. Kings wearing the scepter and crown, and the peasants bearing scythe and spade are all brought to dust and made equal by death. So here the king is compared with the peasant. The king is made equal, and in dust be equal made. In dust meaning in death. At the time of death, he is made equal with the poor peasant, with the poor crooked, the last line of the first stanza, with the poor crooked scythe and spade. Scythe and spade are the implements of the poor farmers, of the peasants. The crooked, here crooked meaning curved. Crooked means curved. Valanya. Scythe meaning that arival, the scythe, valanya. So scythe and spade, spade tumba. So these are the implements of peasants, farmers. Okay, the crooked meaning the curved scythe and spade. So the king is made equal with the poor crooked scythe and spade, meaning king is made equal with the peasant. That's the meaning. Okay, so the king who is wearing the scepter and crown and the peasant who is having scythe and spade are made equal before death. Death comes to kings as well. Kings and the peasants are made equal. Everyone should die. So the vestments and the weapons of the king are not superior in any way to the farming implements. The scepter and crown are not superior to the poor farmer's scythe and spade. Or the king is not at all superior to the farmer. All are made equal before death. Or death levels all differences and disparities that exist among human beings. Therefore, death is called as the leveler. That's the meaning of the title. Death, the leveler. Okay? I hope the meaning of the first stanza is clear. And in the first stanza, we have one more figure of speech. We have instances of metonymy. So, scepter and crown symbolizes the vestments of the kings, isn't it? So, they symbolize kings. And scythe and spade symbolize the peasants. So actually, instead of the word king, the poet has used scepter and crown. And instead of saying the farmer, he has used the words scythe and spade. So here we have a substitution of words. So what is that figure of speech where a word is substituted for another word? We have the figure of speech called metonymy. When one thing is mentioned instead of another. Okay, or substitution of a word with another word which is closely related to that. Substitution of a word, a thing with another word, and the word substituted is closely related to the actual word. And that figure of speech is termed as metonymy. So here, the word king is substituted, okay, with words scepter and crown. And instead of the word farmer, the poet has used scythe and spade. So in these two lines, scepter and crown and scythe and spade, we have metonymy. So in the first stanza, we have three figures of speech. The first two lines we have metaphor. In the fourth line, we have personification. And in eighth line, we have metonymy. And also in the fifth line, also we have metonymy. Let's consider the second stanza. Some men with swords may reap the field and plant fresh laurels where they kill, but their strong nerves at last must yield. They tame but one another still. Early or late, they stoop to fate and must give up their murmuring breath when they pale captives creep to death. So in this second stanza, we could see a battlefield. And in the first line, you could meet some men. Some men with swords may reap the field. And who are the some men mentioned here? Some men are the great emperors. The emperors like Napoleon, Hitler, etc. They have won battlefields. They have won many a battle and raised victory. But they too surrendered to death and have gone to the other world. See, the great warriors, the great swordsmen reap their enemy heads. Some men with swords may reap the field. Here, field is battlefield. So these great swordsmen, these great emperors and warriors, using their swords, they have reaped their enemy heads like reaping the field. Koyuga, to reap. See, they have reaped the heads of their enemies, the heads of their opponents in the battlefield. And by reaping the heads of their opponents, by killing and destroying their enemies, they achieve so much of fame, honor, and praise. So using swords, they may reap the field. They have reaped the heads of their enemies in the battlefield. Field is battlefield. The second line, they plant fresh laurels where they kill. The meaning of the second line, actually it is an example of a metaphor. The meaning is that they achieve fame, honor, and reputation. So they plant fresh laurel. Laurel is here a metaphor. The meaning of the word laurel is that laurel is actually an evergreen plant, an evergreen shrub. Laurel is actually a shrub. And the foliage or the leaves of the laurel are used for making wreath, or the leaves are woven into a wreath or a crown. So laurel, the leaves of laurel are used for making crown, and the laurel crown are worn by the great warriors. The great warriors are crowned with laurels, worn on the head as an emblem of victory. So the wreath made using laurel are worn on the head as an emblem of victory. So laurel symbolizes the honor, victory, praise, to achieve fame, honor, and praise. So they plant fresh laurels, meaning they may win laurel or they are crowned with laurels, where they kill on the spot. They are honored for their courage. At the battlefield itself, they are honored for their courage and strength. So they may achieve, they can win so much of fame, honor, and praise. But what happens to them? But their strong nerves at last must yield. The meaning of the word yield is that they will have to surrender. Surrender. Even their strong nerves meaning their courage, they are very courageous, isn't it? They killed many people. They will have to surrender their courage before death. Even their strong nerves yield at last, and they too stoop to fate. They will stoop. Stoop meaning surrender. Fate means death. They will surrender to death. They too will die early or late. Who knows first? Sooner or later, isn't it? They too will die. Isn't it? So poet means that victory and success are futile before death. Victory and success are all meaningless before death. So without having the wisdom to understand this, we human beings, we mortals, kill each other. We tame each other. They tame. See the fourth line. They tame but one another still. They tame meaning they train the art of killing each other. Tame meaning to train each other. They train to kill each other, to destroy each other. They tame one another still, to become still. Still means that we become still when we die. So to kill each other, we train each other to kill and destroy each other like thoughtless beasts, like animals. We human beings are simply like animals. We don't have wisdom. So all of us will die, that is a fact, isn't it? But still we destroy, we kill each other, we are envious of each other. Actually, we are not supernatural creatures. When death calls us, we will have to leave everything behind and follow death. Isn't it? But the great warriors, they boast of that. They have killed many people. They boast of their heroic victory. These powerful people. Actually, what is the use of this power? The only use of the power is to hit another. So these great emperors and warriors, using their power, they killed and destroyed each other, isn't it? They have many people. They have made many people their slaves. They have made many people their slaves. But what happened to them? Early or late, sooner or later, they stoop to fate. They will have to surrender to death. That's the meaning this is. Stoop meaning surrender. Fate meaning death. And they have to give up their murmuring breath. Murmuring breath meaning the last breath. Murmuring breath, the last breath of a person. Avasana shwasam. They will have to give. They will have to breathe their last. It's very difficult to take our last breath. That's the meaning, murmuring, that grumbling, that the last breath. They too will breathe their last. They too will die and will become pale captives to death. So when they die, what happens to them? They will become pale with shame. The great war heroes become wounded captives of death. Captive meaning prisoners. They become prisoners of death. The great war heroes become wounded captives, creeping to their death. See, they have become pale. The poet says that pale captives. They have become pale with shame in the hands of death. Because unlike in the battlefield, they cannot protest and fight against death. They cannot protest and fight against their captivity. They have become the captives of death now. Death is all powerful. Which means the once victor, they were victors in the war, isn't it? The once victor will one day become the bleeding victim of death, will one day become the prisoners of death, will one day become the bleeding victim on the altar of death. Everyone will die. either it be the great warrior, or the wounded, or the killed poor people. Everyone should equally surrender to death. So even the strongest will kneel down in front of death. Even the strongest and the most powerful of all will have to kneel down and will have to bow their head, stoop, meaning to bow the head. See, we'll have to stoop, we'll have to bow and kneel down before the altar of death. They will have to lie on the altar of death. We will bleed before death. We will become bleeding victims, bleeding captives, and bleeding prisoners of death. All will have to become captives of death. Here also we have a few figures of speech. Some men with swords may reap the field can be considered as a metaphor. See, swords may reap the field. They are killing their enemies. That's the meaning of the line. So killing enemies are compared to reaping of the field. So we have metaphor. And in the second line of second stanza also we have metaphor. And plant fresh laurels where they kill. To plant fresh laurel meaning to win victory, to achieve fame, honor and praise. They are crowned with laurels. So again we have metaphor there. Then we have the last line of second stanza, the pale captives of death. There is a transferred epithet, the pale captives of death, the pale captive. Okay, the murmuring breath can also be considered as an epithet. Yes. So we have metaphor and epithet there in the second stanza. In the third stanza, we could see an altar of human sacrifice as well as a graveyard or a cemetery. Okay, now we will read the third stanza. The garlands wither on your brow, then boast no more your mighty deeds. Upon death's purple altar, now see where the victim bleeds. Your heads must come to the cold tomb. Only the actions of the just smell sweet and blossom in their dust. The first line, the garlands wither on your brow. See, the poet says that. What's the meaning of garland? The meaning of garland is that garland is actually a wreath of flowers or leaves worn on the head or hung as a decoration on the body. The pumala, a wreath of flowers worn on the head or hung on the body. That is a garland. So you may just think about your death day. So when we die, the dead body will be kept inside the coffin. And your whole body will be decorated with beautiful flowers. And a wreath will be kept on your forehead, on your brow. Brow meaning forehead. So the garland wither on your brow. See, after your death, when you are buried inside your grave, what happens? Your garland, everything will wither. Wither meaning dry. So here again we have a metaphor. The garland wither on your forehead, which means all the honoring decorations on your body will dry. Nothing will last long. See, your mighty deeds or the glory of human beings are equated with the mighty deeds or the human glory are equated with the withering of garlands. Like the withering of garlands, your mighty deeds, your glory, your fame of your family, everything disappears and withers. And see, the garlands, your head is decorated with garlands, and the garland on your head will wither, will dry, isn't it? Likewise, your mighty deeds and the human glory will be forgotten forever. Therefore, let us not boast about our so-called mighty deeds. Then boast no more of your mighty deeds. How dare you boast about your mighty deeds? They will not last for long. They are like shadows, it's already said. In the first stanza itself it said, then how can you boast? Boast meaning pomacham paraya, to praise oneself. Then how dare you boast about your mighty deeds if they cannot last? Isn't it? So they are of no use to you. Okay? Huh? And at that time of death, we cannot boast of our mighty deeds and actions. What happens to us? Upon death's purple altar now, see, the victor and victim bleeds. Everyone will have to die, will have to lie. We will die and we will have to lie on the purple altar of death. We will bleed on the purple altar of death. The victor as well as the victim. Victor meaning one who has succeeded in life. And the victim is one who failed in his life. The victorious king as well as the victim will soon become the prisoner of death. The victorious king will soon become the victim of death. The once victor will one day become the victim of death. That is the reality of our life. And the victorious king, he will become an animal which is to be sacrificed on the altar of death. The bluish red blood will drip from his head. We will have to lie on the altar of death. What is the meaning of altar? Altar is actually altara, or it is a place where religious rituals and rites or sacrifices are done. It's a place, the most important place of a temple or a church. So on the altar of death, on the table, see, and the altar of death is purple in color. We will have to lie on the altar of death. And it is purple, the purple altar. Upon death's purple altar, victor and victim bleeds. They are lying on the purple altar of death. Altar of death is purple in color. Purple is dark bluish color, bluish red color, something like a violet color. Okay. And why is it purple? The altar is stained with blood. That is why it's purple in color. Purple is used to describe clotted blood. Purple is a color of clotted blood, dark bluish red color. See, you may have seen priests at the time of funeral ceremony. The dress or the vestment worn by the priest in a funeral ceremony is purple in color. And the altar cloth also may be purple in color, violet color. So it's actually the color of clotted blood. So why is the altar of death? Death in the altar, it's purple in color. Why? Because it's full of blood. The bluish red blood is dripping from the head of the victorious king. Or death is going to bleed him. All of us will lie on the altar of death. Upon the altar, all the people, victor, victim, the poor and the rich, are made equal before death. And death is going to execute us. The victor has become a victim of death. We all of us are like animals sacrificed on the altar of death. And finally, our heads must come to the cold tomb. We will come to the grave, tomb meaning grave. Kallara. We will have to, our heads, we will be taken to the cold tomb. One day, we will be buried inside the cold tomb. Every head, your heads, each one of us heads, every head will one day be buried inside the tomb. We will be buried. Only just and good actions will be remembered after our death. We will be taken to the cemetery. And we will become the food for worms. Our body is to become the food for worms. We will be buried inside a cold tomb, inside the graveyard. And what is that survives death? After death, only our good deeds will be remembered forever. And the good deeds are like beautiful, sweet smelling flowers. So in the last, see the last two lines. Only the actions of the just smell sweet and blossom in their dust. The poet symbolically says that. In a symbolic manner, poet says that if we have done good things in our life, our good deeds will be like beautiful, sweet smelling flowers. They will bloom out of our dust. They will blossom from the dust. Man's great deeds live on after death, and he will become immortal through his good deeds. If he has been just towards his fellow men, then his deeds will be remembered for centuries after death. He will never be forgotten. He will be remembered for his good and noble deeds. Generations come to know about him. His good and noble deeds will blossom like fragrant flowers from dust where he is buried. His deeds will continue to inspire others. His deeds will continue to inspire and motivate others, and he will become immortal. So if we have done good to others, we will be cherished forever, and our souls will go to God, and we can become immortal. So if man has been just and fair in his life, then his actions can never be buried. His actions can never be buried. He will be remembered forever. See, such people who have done noble deeds to others will be remembered and cherished forever. That is the meaning of the last two lines of the poem. Only the just actions, only the actions of the just. What is that survive death? The only thing that survives death is the good, just actions of the good people. Okay. Here in this stanza also we have a few figures of speech like metaphor. The garlands wither on your brow is actually a metaphor. Again, the last two lines, examples of metaphor. Only the actions of the just are compared to sweet smelling flowers. Only the actions of the just smell sweet and blossom in their dust can be metaphor as well as, yes, compared to the actions of the just are compared to sweet smelling flowers. So we have metaphor there. Then the victim bleeds. See the fourth line of last stanza. Victim bleed is actually an example of an oxymoron because we have two opposites placed together. When two terms having opposite meaning are used together, you can call it as an oxymoron. So we have victim bleeds. That's an example of oxymoron. And the cold tomb can be an example of an epithet also. Mighty deeds also can be considered to be an epithet. Now let's consider the rhyme scheme of the poem. Rhyme scheme of the poem is AB, AB, CC, DD. The rhyme scheme of the poem is consistent throughout the poem, and the scheme is AB, AB, CC, DD. Okay, so here is we have such a kind of a beautiful and a powerful poem. So we have the theme, rhyme scheme, you have the figures of speech, we discussed everything. The mood of the poem is a little bit scary, and the tone is very, very powerful. Actually, the poet is trying to teach many things. So it's a very powerful tone. The poet has used a very powerful tone, and the mood is little scary. So I hope the poem is clear to you. Now, after reading the poem, you will have to prepare an appreciation of the poem, and you will have to send it to my personal number. Prepare an appreciation of the poem, as well as also do the question answers, activity 1 and 2 in your textbook. Okay, activity 1 and to complete the question answers also. Activity 1, there are 9 short questions. You may answer the questions in 1 or 2 sentences. And activity 2, you have 2 question answers. You may answer them in a small paragraph. And also prepare an appreciation of the poem too. Okay, complete it within 2 or 3 days. Hope the poem is clear to you. Thank you, my dear children.